God allowed Israel to go from being in bondage, well, under the king of Mesopotamia's rule for 8 years, and then the king of Moab, Eglon, for 18 years. And I was just pretty much saying how, sometimes we delay the blessings in our lives and delay the deliverance in our lives because we just haven't learned the first time. And then we're disobedient or haven't learned the second time and the third time. So we just keep delaying what the Lord, wants for us. And that could be deliverance, that could be blessings, that could be things that we're praying for, because of disobedience, because um, we're not learning the lesson the first time and the second time. It's like we continue to repeat it until we finally submit to the will of the Lord. So Israel here is, like I said, sometimes, like a lot of times, I want to say we mimic Israel in a way, and that's why even before we started during the prayer, it's for us to like learn from their mistakes so we don't end up doing the same thing. But I wanted you to pay attention to that, to how it went from 8 years to 18 years. So we see how after Othniel died, that they went right back to square one. That was pretty much like, oh, Othniel is gone. We could go back to getting lit, go back to going crazy. So that's exactly what we did. And like we had mentioned in, I believe, chapter 2, there's unseen eyes watching us. So even though Othniel wasn't present anymore, God was still there watching them. Though leaders in our lives aren't present 24/7 to see us, we could, in front of their face, we could show one thing, but behind their backs, we could be doing something different. But God still sees, you know?
I think it's one of those things too where you ever heard the saying where a drowning man will clutch at a straw. A drowning man will clutch at a straw. So God allowing them to be in bondage or under um just under a ruler that's wicked, right? A pagan ruler. I'm sure they weren't treated well. So even though even though their actions caused them to be under these two different kings within Canaan that were wicked, um, because they were treated, of course, horribly, I could only imagine, if when they saw a leader or judge rise up that God sent, they was just like, hey, we with you on this one, even though they put themselves in that pit. It's kind of like they were looking for any kind of help to get out of the pit, even though they put themselves in it. Um, so even though God raised up the first judge, Othniel, and I'm sure they were a little bit more familiar with Othniel because being Caleb's was a younger brother and seeing things that he did before, so they probably were more familiar. But even with the other judges like rising up, they were just kind of like, man, we just need deliverance type thing. We just need deliverance. We don't care who it's from as long as like you're mighty or God sent you, like we with it. Like we need deliverance. But it's crazy. Like the irony is that they go right back to doing what they were doing before. Um and it's interesting because the scripture told, and you mentioned it earlier too, how the scripture tells us that back in, it might have been in Deuteronomy too, how God commanded them to like teach their children, you know? So we can only assume, like, teach your children, the ways of the Lord, the commandments of the Lord, um, what the Lord has brought you through, like, share your testimony. So we can only assume that they might not have been sharing the testimony for these generations because there was at one point it said they were good for like 40 years and they were good for like 80 years. So it's kind of like within that time frame, like a baby can become a grown man or a grown woman. So it's kind of like, are you sharing that testimony with the next generation? Because we see each generation that each time the judge dies, they go right back into doing what they were doing before. And now that I'm speaking about it too, I'm reminded of, the sins of the parents. It visits, it's I believe it's in Deuteronomy or somewhere, or one of the first five books, where it says the sins of the parents visit the third and the fourth generation. There's another scripture that says, uh huh yeah. So I believe it's somewhere in Exodus where it also states that, I believe it says, the father sucks the sour grapes and the children's teeth are set on edge. So pretty much, what our parents have done, grandparents, great grand, it can turn into generational sins or iniquity that visits the generation, you know. So it was happening here with Israel, where it's like the parents are sucking the sour grapes, children teeth on edge. Now when the children become parents, they're sucking the sour grapes, their children teeth are set on edge, and it's like this cycle just going until like somebody wakes up and says, well, this needs to be broken. So they was pretty much in a circle. It reminds me of the song. No longer take me in a circle. Yeah, so yeah, it just becomes a circle, a cycle. And we're no different. We're no different. But it's when the difference is, I feel I'm going on like a spiel here, but the difference is, when we come to Christ and we give him these things and ask him to break these things, he does it. I believe it's somewhere in Jeremiah or Ezekiel where he says, no longer will you use the quote of, um, the sins of the parents visit the third and fourth. Now, in the scripture, like it was said that now each person is going to be judged for their own actions. So it's not that generational curses and iniquities aren't real because we're born into sin, shaping in iniquity. But we also have to take accountability, for what we have done, and even unfortunately for iniquity in our generation. When you know better, you do better. So